Hey guys, and welcome back to the Kerbal Space Program. It has been a while, so I'm really struggling to remember what happened last episode. So I think it was something along the lines of, okay, so yeah, we made our Minmus station, the Van Allen Minmus station, and we went out and we made some repairs on our Minmus Lander, as you can see there. We then returned a lot of the crew from the Minmus outpost, as you can see here. We brought them all back, and this episode, what we're going to try and do is start work on constructing a Van Allen Mun station. So almost exactly the same type of station, but just with crew designed to go around the Mun, and we've added new solar panels as well, as you can see there. But we'll chat about that later. You can see there, and all of its glory. So yeah, as I said earlier, we're using almost exactly the same components. So what you can see here is the central core, the Van Allen central core, Mark II this time, and we're launching it in much the same way. I'm going to speed through a lot of these launches, just getting some cinematic shots here. But you guys don't really need to see all of that. You know, you're probably going to see this a million times in your Kerbal careers. Anyhow, we start heading up into equatorial orbit, so we can start assembling this thing in orbit, because I haven't actually got very big launches, so I need to really launch it in small pieces. So you can see here we're just circularizing our orbit, just bringing it around. And that's the first segment. That's the station core. So it has a lot of all of the habitation. It has that kind of octagonal central piece, which is a habitation part. It increases the habitation timer basically, which is part of the USI colonization system. So this here, if I remember correctly, is the power module. It's quite updated from the Mark I Van Allen station. It's got much bigger battery parts, and it also has a bunch of new solar panels as well. Wait, is it the new power module? I think it might be. Anyhow, we'll find out when it gets into orbit. So yeah, pretty much the same procedure again. I've cut most of it out, just circularize their orbit, make sure that we're lined up. And yeah, I was correct. It was the power module. So you've got a couple of really big batteries on there, and a couple of solar struts that we can stick together and make a really big solar array. Yeah, that's my phone going off there. Yeah, so what we're doing here is just decoupling these struts one by one, and then they have an individual guidance system. You can see there we had a bit of a problem. For some reason we couldn't detach the docking port, so we had to manually detach it with our engineer. I think that was Bob. Anyhow, we just we fly it over. I'm using the Navy Fish docking alignment indicator, which is an absolute lifesaver if you don't have some kind of automated docking system. And yeah, we're flying this over part by part and just sticking on the side. Now, for aesthetic reasons, it's quite important that we have these rotated the right way, as well as orientated the right way, if you know what I mean. So rotation and pointing direction have to be lined up to get this docking right, so that the panels don't stick out in random directions. But you can see here I've actually gotten quite good at this since the last time, and all of them seem to be aligned quite nicely. So yeah, I'm just extending all the panels. It's all accelerated for you because it's quite I haven't got a key binding, unfortunately. I didn't think that far ahead. So you can just get a little cinematic shot of the station in its early stages of construction. So yeah, the next part of our station is going to be the science module, which is almost exactly the same as the Mark I Van Allen science module. It's just got a couple of changes. You can see that we've actually upgraded our docking port system to the slightly larger size of docking port, which will help with stability. But to be honest, we were doing fine. You know, we had even when we were boosting out under the large mainsail, we didn't really have any sort of problem. It was just yeah, it's just nicer and more secure, I guess, to have bigger docking ports, and we can add more stuff to the station without it wobbling too crazily. So yeah, we just have to get rid of the boost stage. I don't actually have any sort of control on that booster stage, unfortunately, so I'll probably just add to our crazy Kessler syndrome, just floating around in orbit waiting for something to run into it. But yeah, I mean, we come in nicely, we get docked, and there's plenty of opportunity for cinematic flybys, as you can see here. So now the final segment of the of the station is going to be our booster module, the module that's going to send us all the way out to the Mon, and we actually need less delta V as the prior Van Allen station, the Mark 1, because to get out to the moon we need less delta V, but we'll be refueling our rover or our lander from the station anyway, so we might as well just use the same parts. There's no point in changing things up. Obviously I've made the change of adding a different type of docking port to the booster stage, but beyond that it's almost exactly the same design. So there you can see we're finally all together, and now we just need to boost out to the Mon, which is what we're doing right now. You can see another cinematic flyby. I'm getting quite fond of those. Anyhow, I'm just now just using the old technique of just waiting for the moon to come above the horizon, and then just burning prograde to get my encounter with the Mon. There's no point in using maneuver nodes. Yeah, so if you don't know, if you want to try and get an encounter with a Mon, all you need to do is just wait for the Mon to come above the horizon. Now you just need to burn prograde towards it. It's as easy as that. It just dates from the time when, you know, in the game you couldn't actually use maneuver nodes, so they had to, I suppose, make it, you know, give you a rule of thumb of how to get to the Mon, which, you know, at the time was the only like body that was in the Kerbal system aside from Kerbal itself. But yeah, that was a long time ago. Anyhow, we're just getting our encounter with the Mon, trying to trim down our apoapsis so we get in nice and close, and utilize that Oberth effect. Okay, so we're just getting plenty of cinematic shots of us falling into the Mon's gravity well, and as we come closer we're going to turn around and see if we can do our retrograde burn. Now, turning the station is actually a bit of a nightmare. It takes ages. You have to do it with accelerated physics, otherwise you get bored shitless. But as you can see, we do get into quite a nice equatorial orbit, and I decide to keep my orbit relatively low. It's always a bit of a trade-off trying to choose an orbit, because ideally you want to be quite far out in terms of generating electricity from your solar panels, because you don't want to be in the shadow of the moon for very long, or the Mon, but you also want to be close enough to the surface so that it's not very difficult for your landers to return to the space station. Yeah, it's always a bit of a trade-off. It's hard to decide, but normally closer is better, because fuel is worth more than electric charge, generally speaking, in KSP, which is not necessarily true of real space programs, but certainly of KSP. Anyhow, we're now going to be launching our one of the classic spacecrafts of this series. This is the Von Braun, and it is just as good as landing on the Mon as it is on Minmus. I don't actually know that yet, or at the time of filming this, but I'm just going to hope that it is. The Delta V stats seem to show that it's capable of landing on the Mon. And if you remember, I've made some changes to the lander design, actually. I'm using inflatable fuel tanks on the side instead of detachable fuel tanks, so it has a higher delta V now than it used to, but it has to be refueled once it's in orbit of the Mon. So that's why we brought out all that fuel to the Mon in our Van Allen station. Anyhow, we're just getting it into orbit, and now we have to do a kind of Apollo-style I can't remember what it's called. There's a name for it. Anyway, it's you have to kind of reassemble the orbiter in order to, like, you know, they take the lander out of the cargo bay and drag it out. There was a whole thing, you know. They had to do it all in orbit. But I'm kind of doing that kind of thing. You know, trying to replicate it in some way, I suppose. So yeah, we're detaching the return vehicle and the lander, and then we're going to point them towards each other and dock them. And they're both going to travel out to Minmus together, to the Mun, rather. I hope you see what I mean about the kind of Apollo parallels there. It's pretty poor at explaining it. I'm sure there's a word for that. I'll think of it at some point. Anyhow, we get them together and get a nice cinematic shot of them just orbiting, I guess. And there, as the Mun comes above the horizon, we start our burn out to the station. You can see here I've got the time accelerated burn because it does take ages. There's a lot of mass on the, with those inflatable fuel tanks. There is a lot of mass on that orbiter now, which it needs in order to get out there and get the amount of delta V. Anyway, it renders our thrust to weight ratio quite rubbish, as I'll unfortunately find out later when I'm trying to land on the Mun. Anyhow, we get a nice cinematic shot of us heading out of Kerbin's, I keep on trying to say Earth, Kerbin's gravitational influence and towards the Mun. Well, I guess technically still in Kerbin's gravitational influence, but you don't want to be pedantic. Towards the Mun, anyway. And for some reason I get some kind of strange texture glitch here. I don't know what it is, but for some reason it just doesn't want to kind of render that segment of the Mun. Anyhow, we detach our lander and bring it into dock, which is quite complicated because the docking port is stupidly located in between some very delicate solar panels, but I'm an expert at docking, as you can clearly see here, and I manage anyway. That that slice of the Mun that hasn't rendered is really troubling me. That triggers me quite heavily. Anyway, we get our fuel reserves stocked up, and we get 2 appropriate pilots on board. I think it's it would be Jeb and the scientist. It's either Bill or Bob. I can't remember who the scientist. Yeah, one of the two. The scientist guy. And we start burning towards our selected land site. Now, we spent quite a lot of time actually I spent a lot of time off camera trying to select the perfect landing site. And I eventually figured out that the best one it's like they intersect between 3 or 4 different biomes. So we can try and maximize our scientific yield and minimize the amount of fuel that we expend, or the amount of trips that we have to go on. Because basically the more science we get, the better, and trips are effort to do. It takes me like 30 minutes to do a trip to the moon, and it's pretty boring. So you can see here we've landed in a biome that's in the middle of the intersect of like 3 different biomes, and now we're just gonna science spam and see how much we can get. I mean, if you wanna talk realism or immersion, this is some kind of old like volcanic site or something with loads of different old continents that have come together or something. Some kind of geological reason for it being an area of interest, if you get what I mean. So yeah, maybe this was like an old volcano or something. Anyhow, there's lots of juicy science to be had, and we just need to hop from biome to biome and gather all the relevant sites and take rock samples and whatever else that you need to do in order to get science in IRL. Yeah, you can see we're sliding down the hill there, but luckily we have surface, some kind of surface tether on the rover. Not the rover, the lander. I keep on saying rover. So yeah, we just we do this a couple more times, just filling up the science larders, making sure that we have science to process on the station for the next year, 2 years, 3 years. I don't actually know how much I end up coming away with, but I want to maximize the amount of science that I get per trip to the surface, because doing surface trips it's not. I mean, it's interesting the first few times you do it, but I've probably been to the surface of the Mun like at least 30, 40 times in my KSP career, and after a while it starts to get slightly boring. I really want to kind of accelerate through this early career stuff and get it done with as soon as possible. Anyhow, so we start heading in towards the station once again with our bounty of science. Just retract those landing gear as we come in. And at this point, I think I realised that I've made a bit of a mistake. I don't actually have a science container on the station itself, so we can only really store science on the lander, which is pretty rubbish, because if we lose the lander, we lose everything. Anyhow, I try and get as much as I can into the science module and get it processing. And off camera, I also send off some of the science that doesn't get a reduction from being transmitted. So we have some science to work with. And we wind up transmitting about 300 science over to the base, and I use it to unlock this electronics node, which has some science experiments and a radar dish. Anyhow, that's all from me. Thanks for watching, and hopefully the next episode will come out quite shortly.